Oh, hello, world. What's up? Welcome to Build. I'm your host, Matt Forte. We are here live at the Build Studio in New York City. For his latest film, our next guest spent the last 6-some-odd years painstakingly combing through more than 11,000 hours of uncatalogued audio and heaps of previously unseen 65mm footage taken in the days leading up to, during, and after Apollo 11, NASA's most celebrated mission, the one that first put men on the moon. Now, 50 years later, his film serves not only as a jaw-dropping spectacle, but a beautiful reminder of what humanity can achieve when we work together. This film is bananas. I am so excited he's here. Director of Apollo 11, Todd Douglas Miller, is in the building. How we feel about that? We excited, huh? I'm excited. Can you tell? I'm very excited. We're going to bring him out in just a second. But first, I believe we have a short trailer for the film, so let's go ahead, run that clip. Ladies and gentlemen, make some noise. Todd Douglas Miller right here. Come on, put your hands together.
Thank you.
Thank you, man. Thank you for putting in. I can't even imagine how much time into this movie, and we're going to talk about it. I'm very excited to talk to you. Congratulations. This thing is fantastic, man. Yeah.
Thanks. Yeah, you know, there is a 9-day version of this film. So yeah, the mission lasted. You know, it spanned 9 days. It's like 8 days and change. But that's how we started. So we just needed to know exactly where everything was: audio, video, still imagery, everything put out on the timeline, so we could take a look at it and then whittle it down to what you got here.
We're going to get deep into how you arrived at that and how that all happened. But first and foremost, I had said, and I read this earlier, keep me honest, was it about 6 years, give or take, that it took the whole thing front to back for you to make this?
I mean, I like to say
more?
It was 50 years, you know.
Yeah.
It was like we started really, when we really started on it, and it was, you know, this was our focus, and this was all everyone was working on. It was a tail end of 2016. So, you know, we like to say we crammed in 10 years of research and, you know, editing and everything else, you know, within that short 3-year period.
And I can't imagine. Now here we are, 100% of Rotten Tomato. People are going nuts for it. It's about to open nationwide. How are you feeling right now? The world is finally going to go ahead and see this thing.
I mean, it's extraordinary. I mean, we set out to make an art film, you know, and to have it just be as accurate as anything that had ever been, you know, come before. And it's a really great testament to not only, you know, our team, the filmmaking team, but certainly the you know, the astronauts that worked with us, the families, all the wonderful folks back at NASA, National Archives. It's just a really great story of teamwork for all of us to get together to make the film possible.
It's kind of a beautiful thing. It parallels the story of the mission itself. You really get to see towards the end. It's just like, I mean, you see all throughout, but those moments where they're finally home and you're seeing just the masses of scientists and mathematicians and just everybody that came together to make this happen, and it's kind of a big part of the movie. Take me back to the very beginning stages for you when you realized. You were sort of at the base of this Mount Everest. What was your step one when you understood the scope of what it was you were going to have to do to make this possible?
Well, you know, you can't make a film about Apollo 11 or any of, you know, space movie in my mind without kind of casting a wide net. We made a little short film about Apollo 17 where we kind of played with narrative structure. We wanted it to kind of feel like you were going on this mission, going on the ride with the guys that were doing it. And we had some things transferred, some film from back then. I wasn't really happy with the results. So when this came up, Apollo 11, we said we want to rescan everything. We want to know what's available out there within the whole spiderweb of NASA, National Archives, private collectors, everywhere. So in doing that, somebody really had my back on that, which was our post-production facility here in New York was getting into the film scanning business. At the same time, a lot of companies were getting out of it because it's film. So they were deploying some newer technology that would allow us to not only scan it in very high resolutions, but also we didn't really care what gauge the film was. So not to get too technical, but it didn't matter if it was 8mm, 35, 16, 65, 70, we didn't care because everything rode on a cushion of air through the actual scanner. It wasn't really, in the past, it was these pull-down claws, you know, if you think like film sprockets moving along. We didn't have to rely on that. So when we basically proposed to, you know, NASA and National Archives, we want to redo everything because it really hadn't been a good effort to, you know, update all this quality in so long. They naturally saw our project as a vehicle to do that, to update things. And that began a long process of research, you know, how much is out there. And then probably about 3 or 4 months into it was this discovery. I got an email actually from one of the archivists in National Archives and said, look, we have this pile of large format films. They say Apollo 11 on them. Some of them had the dates of, you know, around the launch of July 16th, 1969, but we have no idea what's on them.
That's wild. When you like, especially having seen the film and understanding the full gravity of this moment in time and the significance within the moment in time for humanity, that there was just a pile film that, well, we don't know what it is. It might have to do with that time we went to space. I don't know. The first time we went, I don't know. It could be. It might not. I don't know. And so you find this out. You get all this. How far in... I'm curious about the evolution of the project because you get this discovery, you find all this from mountains of data that wasn't available to you before. Do you know from that point immediately that you're going to be able to do this in such a way that you don't need talking heads, you don't need all the usual documentary tropes, that you have enough here, audio and video-wise, that you can tell this story just with the first-hand stuff that you have?
Yeah, I mean, I knew that even before the large format stuff. Okay. It was, you know, we were, I mean, in fact, even though I think other members of the team were very excited by this, I was, of course, just being a fan, trying to constantly be a student of cinema. I'm a giant fan of these large format films from the 40s or from the 50s and the 60s that predate IMAX films. So there was all these wonderful films, not the Hollywood films, but these films that were shown in like science centers, museums, expos, where they would shoot Cinerama, 3 cameras, 3 projection systems, do cut downs, crazy split screens. They'd play with like fractured narrative, and you know they were doing whispered narration 30 years before Terrence Malick was. You know, so I was always a fan of those. They're hard to find, and I kind of thought maybe that's what some of this stuff was. You know, it was just some guys kind of screwing around down there, and then we got the first. We got 2 reels were brought up to test with, basically, and to see what was on them. And the first one that we saw was, and by the way, the scanner was a prototype, so it was built specifically for this project. And at the time, we were dealing in 4K resolutions. We did have the ability to go up to 16K, but the back-end systems, it was very, you know, the workflows were pretty crazy.
Well, how do you even
we
work
settled
with that
on about
much?
8K.
Okay.
There was like some diminishing return. You know, it's like you can only go so high and so far with some of this stuff. But that first test reel, I'll never forget. It gives me chills even talking about it. It's the data rates were so big that we would just see like on a monitor just every 3 or 4 seconds an image. And what we saw was the Saturn V on the crawler going out to the pad. And it was flipped upside down because the image had been B-wound. So we're all craning our necks to look at it, and we're like, our jaws are on the ground. Yeah. But what was more astonishing was it wasn't just a camera that was on the ground. It was actually in a helicopter, so it was an aerial shot. So we were just floored that someone was, you know, had this large format, these large format cameras, not on the ground, but in a, you know, in a helicopter, and they actually had some production value to them. Yeah. And then the second reel was the guys getting suited up the day of the launch, and it was just, I mean, it was, you know, it was like a religious experience. We digitized it very quickly, ran around the corner, put it up on the big screen, and we just, nobody said a word for like a half an hour. We were just floored, you know.
That's the part I was thinking. As soon as you said, like, you're looking at the every 3 frames come in, I'm like, all right, how much time transpires between that moment and when they put it on the biggest screen they
About
could possibly
28 minutes. The longest 28 minutes of our careers.
You like bundle it up, quick, let's go, run next door. You throw it up there. That's amazing, man. Yeah, especially when they're getting suited up to something. So, like, yeah, we could talk all day about, of course, the obvious, which is this is gorgeous and it transports you in time, but also seeing their faces that large and seeing just the gravity of this moment and like understanding. There's so many little details that are woven throughout this that are either lost because I've only ever seen the footage or similar footage on TV or something like that, and and not at this level of clarity and stability and all that sort of stuff. So okay, so you establish I'm going to tell this, no talking heads, I'm going to do this and that. When do you decide? Because and I could be wrong about this, but outside of the credits, and there's only one other instance where there's something that wasn't shot then. It's the basic digital, the very basic animations to illustrate like how they're going to maneuver and stuff. Was even that a concession of like, were you trying to stay pure to like, we have all this stuff? Is there a way to not have to add anything? Like, what was the mission once you realized what you had?
Yeah, I mean, we definitely wanted to kind of keep it in its purest form without anything. Just kind of that dogma of direct cinema. We're not all the way there with this project because we do introduce score. We're not fly on the wall. We have sound design and animations, but one of the things early on that once we found this imagery, we were constantly we began the process of researching. Where the hell did this stuff come from? Like, who shot this? Who, just where and why? And the current thinking was, I was enough of a space geek to know that there was a cult classic out there called Moonwalk 1. It was funded by NASA. It was shot and produced by a really great large format company called Francis Thompson Company. Francis Thompson himself was supposed to direct this. The director was this guy, Theo Kamika, who was an editor on previous Thompson films. And NASA commissioned it. At one time, MGM was involved, but they came to the Apollo 11 launch. They shot a little bit in the control room, and then they were there for the recovery. And it's a great little art film. NASA knew the world would be saturated with Apollo 11 50 years ago, so they just wanted a time capsule. So they went out and got these really great artists to shoot this stuff. Two of we owe a debt of gratitude to them for sure, and the two cinematographers that Theo had hired. One guy was named Urs Fuhrer. They called him the Bear. He would handhold these giant Tadeo Mitchell cameras, 50 years before everybody in IMAX was doing it. And this other guy, his name is a Dutch filmmaker named Jan Spoen, and there's these beautiful scenes on the beach in and around the launch pad. And he went out and shot all that stuff. But those guys, in conjunction with a couple of NASA hired through Technicolor cameramen down there, were running around with these large format cameras. And it just wasn't the Moonwalk 1 guys their artistry was apparent in all the Apollo 11 footage for that launch. But the Technicolor guys were shooting all the way back to the Gemini program that predates Apollo, and then they went as far as like about Apollo 12 is the limit of what we have.
When you were sorting through all that, did you find yourself filtering like, is this from Apollo? Is this not from? But like, was it pretty clear that you just had Apollo stuff to work with, or was a large part of it just not identifying simply when it happened, but what is this?
It was pretty random. I mean, but luckily, NASA was great. We had just great consultants. Our archive producer, Steven Slater. We basically went out and got like the best nerds in the business to like analyze this stuff, to look at exactly what it was. If you put yourself back in the late '60s, early '70s, the Apollo program, everything happened in a very protracted amount of time. So some reels you would see a launch of like Apollo 11, and then on the same reel, they would be wheeling out Apollo 12 on the pad. So things were happening very, very quickly. So it's really a story, as far as the footage is concerned, of archive preservation. The fact that there was a system put in place by NASA and the National Archives as the end repository to develop this film, get it out, like physically just make dubs of it and get it out to the various NASA facilities, and then put it in cold storage and put it there until technology would come along, or somebody like myself would be interested in utilizing it.
Something I'm thinking about how you said we had the best nerds working on this. Something you guys do to great effect, where perhaps maybe
I didn't even answer your animation question. I'm so sorry.
It's all right, dude. I'm
But that's where it came from. Just to answer the question, was this Moonwalk 1 uses all this old school cell animation, and I fell in love with it. It's great. Like how the spacecraft articulates itself in space. So in the film, we do a very similar technique to articulate where the spacecrafts are. Sorry.
You know, it's all right. I'm such a geek for this stuff. I'm like hanging on every word. I'm like, yeah, and then you found what, like, but so something you guys do to great effect, and it kind of ties into this idea, the adding content. But there's a moment, couple of moments, twice, I think, when the burn and then on the landing, you guys superimpose and synchronize velocity or fuel levels, all these different elements, all this data that obviously you had to have received from NASA. Talk about synchronizing all of that, like synchronizing not only the footage with that data and with the audio and all of that stuff. Was that just a matter of getting some of the smartest guys you could find to help you put it together? And what did that feel like the first time you saw it all? Like, we've done it. This is it. This is everything in real time. This is what happened.
Yeah, I mean, my job's kind of easy. I mean, I edited it, but it was more of like just taking the best stuff of what all the other team members were working on and just putting it together. So it's really, you know, hats off to them. Our archive producer, Steven Slater, I mean, talk about just tedious work. None of the footage in Mission Control has audio on it. It's not sunk. It was not shot with any sound. So the early Apollo missions, there's no sound on any of that. The later ones, 15, 16, 17, there was. So for 11, what he would do, and he's been spending, you know, most of his adult life doing this, is taking the air-to-ground transmissions and lip-syncing it to all of the guys in Mission Control. And not only that, when you see the original reels, you know, which we scanned, it's just a cluster of, like, they had 2 camera guys, and they would, each one had like 2 ARES cameras with these 200-foot daylight spools, and they would like on off the camera in like 10-second bursts, put one down, then grab one, go over here, get another one. The other guy's racing, he's getting just beauty shots of if somebody was talking, you know. So Steve, if you were lucky on one of those reels, they would like pan up to like one of the clocks and then pan down to a face, and then you could sync off of that clock and maybe get the audio in place. 9 times out of 10, it's just listening and just, you know, by sheer repetition, just trying to get it, you know, you know, matching their lips, and knowing that the guy was wearing maybe, you know, like a yellow shirt on day 4, and you know, and a green shirt on, you know, on day 6. So it was really that was a large part of it was Steven's work with the Mission Control stuff, and then of course all the telemetry that's on the screen is from transcripts through the wonderful work of Bill Barry, who's the chief historian at NASA, in his office. MIT actually did all the flight dynamics before you know, they went to NASA. So a lot of the archives come from MIT, and then our sound designer, Eric Milano, we were set out to hire this giant team, but we worked so long on the project. Typically, you go out, you hire like a sound designer and a mixer and a re-record mixer and a Foley artist and all this stuff. We just worked so long on it that Eric ended up wearing all of those hats. And outside of our IMAX audio mixer, Brian Eimer, they were the only 2 people that touched this as far as the audio goes, with sound effects, taking like the sound of a Saturn V rocket. I mean, that took us years to perfect. We got lucky in that we partnered with Air and Space down at Smithsonian on the IMAX screen, so we could, you know, develop scenes, go down there, test it, play it for, you know, for the astronauts and their families, play it for people that were there. You know, proximity editing was a big thing with Eric. You know, what does it sound like? What did the Saturn V sound like 2 miles away? What does it sound like if you were on the Banana River on a boat and you were Rick and Mark Armstrong with, you know, Neil's wife Janet? What did that sound like? What did it sound like from a helicopter? What did it sound like from a plane? You know, we've shot planes, you know, aerials. So it's just a tremendous sound design and sound editing work that Eric did, for sure.
And it is beautifully done. Like, that's why I love having this chance to sit down and talk to you, because when you watch it, it's one of those things where if you did your job right, it looks like you did nothing at all. You know what I mean? Where it's like all this stuff just kind of comes together and you get lost in the moment, lost in the achievement of all this stuff. But But to have the opportunity to sit here and talk to you is really cool, man, because I could tell that you guys put blood, sweat, and tears into this thing to make it work. We're going to go over to the audience in a little bit, but I would be remiss not to bring up the music and the work that Matt did on this film. Just talk a little bit about how he approached it and what he used to do it, for those that don't know and did the research I did. It's pretty wild what he used to compose.
Yeah, so Matt Morton is our music composer, and the soundtrack comes out tomorrow too, by the way. And then they're going to do like a big vinyl release, I think, too, which would be kind of cool. Yeah, for like awesome. The anniversary later on. But again, I'm so proud of him as I am all the team. But I've known Matt since we were in elementary school. We grew up in Columbus, Ohio, and you couldn't have like walked down the street, and not heard the the name Neil Armstrong or John Glenn, all these astronauts. So Matt has this amazing basement in Columbus, Ohio, that's just filled with like just every instrument you can imagine. And usually we do post-scoring for our films. I'll temp something in, give it to him, he'll post-score it, and give it back, and it's always spot on. And for this one, he goes, I just want to do a period score with modern composition. I go, okay, Matt, I didn't know exactly what he was talking about. Week later, he gets a 1968 Moog synthesizer, and they just, Moog reissued one, a few years ago. He got one of 25, learned how to play it. Yeah, in the world, and didn't know how to play it. But then in the middle of the night, I'd get like these 2-hour-long Moog synthesized compositions. And from an editing standpoint, it was great. Like I could just play with like tone, structure. Like, is this working? Is that working? And then, of course, we can dial it in. And then once he got over the years, as he got better on it and progressed. And Matt's like, he's like us with the space stuff. Like he gets like really into the research of just that. So, he basically just stayed up for years learning how to perfect this thing. And I'm so and once he kind of got really good at it, we started talking about how it could be the voice of things that we couldn't fill in the gaps in some places. Right. He's like me. We like films where you don't necessarily see the fingerprints of the filmmakers, and particularly with this, it's like you got great footage, you got great sound, just stand out of the way of it and just let it breathe. But there were moments during some of the burns that happened. There's very complex maneuvers that happen in space, and we talked about Matt's music being a voice of the spacecraft and having, driving the scene. Because the astronauts, quite frankly, are, the nerves of steel. Their hearts are racing, but on the loops, they sound like they're just having a cup of coffee with you.
That was one of my favorite details, is when you would get the heart rates of the astronauts slightly like before or after the landing or during the launch. Was it Neil was at 88 or was that Buzz? I think Buzz was at 88.
Buzz was 88 on the launch.
Buzz was 88 on the launch. Buzz's heart rate during the launch was cool 88. I go up to like 92 having a cheese stick upstairs in the snack room. This dude got launched into space, hung out at 88. It was phenomenal. And especially nowadays, people that have like Apple Watch and stuff, we're more cognizant of that shit. So you can see that, you hear a number like that, it really means something. But I love that little detail. Not to get too far off of the work that Matt did. But we got to turn it over. We got some questions in the room. Is that right, Kate? We got one question in the room we're going to take. And then if they don't stop me, I'm going to talk to you for another hour and a half. So let's go ahead and take our question. What do we got?
Gotcha. Hi. So you guys talked a lot about going through the mass of footage and sorting through that. And I'm just curious, where working with archival footage, where the goal is more about historical documentation, about how you as an editor found an emotional arc to drive through all of that.
Oh, that's a great question, yeah. Certainly rifling through all that footage, and the film is one, part of the project. The other part is, the curation of these materials and the archive of it and the preservation of it. So we all felt like an immense responsibility, to take our time with it and still do. It's an ongoing, process. But in looking through, I mentioned the suiting up shots. That's a really great example. The day of the launch, you just see this. They have these stoic faces, and you could just see there's no talking. They're just going through the paces. Training's kind of kicking in, and they're just trying to, get out the door and one foot in front of the other. But a couple days before, they did a dry run, and they shot it in large format. The guys are joking around. Neil Armstrong obviously got a haircut in between, like the dry run and the real thing. They do the same thing, though. They get all suited up in the pressure suits. They walk out the door. They get in the Astro van. They drive out to the pad 8 miles away. They get in the elevator. They sit on top of the rocket. But then the difference is they get off and they go home. The day of the launch, in large format, when you see that, and I've seen some of those images over the decades multiple times, it just kind of never really hit me. But when you see it in that kind of quality, you just see the weight of the world written all over these guys' faces and what they're about to do and how they represent all of us. And it feels to me, and I was never lost on it in the edit suite. Late at night, I'd be sitting there. I'm just like, God, what would have been going through these guys' heads? I mean, luckily, I got to talk to them about it. but certainly, it just had to be just a tremendous, as Walter Cronkite says in the film, the burden and the hopes of all mankind, and that's exactly what it was. And you see it, written on their faces, and that goes for everyone that was there. People that are watching the launch, they were having a great time. This is like, this is a Super Bowl of all Super Bowls, and then when you see those flight controllers, in the room, and you see their faces in that kind of quality, it really drives home, the accomplishment, and also how they're part of this entire network that all work together to do this amazing thing and to represent all of us. And it was just really quite extraordinary.
Yeah, I love the beach sequence. It's just the spectator stuff that I'd never seen before. Just regular people that day waiting for this moment, how watching them wake up to the sunrise on the beach and the hood of the roof of their cars and stuff, and fixing their hair and just such a moment in time. And it was something that really hit me when I was talking about in the green room. Is like a lot of people today are like, oh, America comes together in a time of tragedy, a great war, whatever it is, what it takes to get everybody to band back together. We need a conflict. And it's like, nah, dude, that's not. Everybody in the world got together because we were going to space. We were doing something we'd never done before. And literally, you get to see in this film everyone come together for that one moment in time, be on the same page. Like, I can't believe we're all doing this. Like, it's a real deal, and it's a beautiful moment. Hang on one second. It wasn't in the film, but you talked to the astronaut. You talked to Buzz, or what was that conversation like? What were you?
Yeah, it was great. There were certain things. I mean, just reading their autobiographies, interviews over the years. There were certain things that I wanted to see depicted in the space film that I'd never seen depicted before. So it was the pleasure of my life to design a scene, show it to Buzz or Mike Collins, and get immediate feedback. Well, that works. This doesn't. For instance, during the landing, there's a scene where there's two alarms that are going off, the 1202 and 1201 alarms. And you see everyone reacting to that in real time. We have, we didn't talk about it, but there was over 11,000 hours of audio related to mission control that we were given a couple months into the project. So rifling through that was really an amazing feat by the team. But there's backroom engineers. There's a 24-year-old flight controller that was reporting to his flight controller. His name's Jack Garman, who gave the abort or no abort or the go command to keep on going. And it was him alone. No one knew what these alarms were. But the actual tone of the alarms, I figured there had to be something, because an audible tone of some sort, we're asking the experts, nobody really knew. Bill Berry and his group, Buzz had confirmed, yes, there was something in our headsets. So we went back to NASA. They gave us a document a short time later, and it had the actual kilohertz tone that was going through the headset. We gave that to our sound designers. They could replicate it. We could show it to Buzz. Is this when you were in the LEM, with the headset on? Is this what it sounded like? Is this too much? Is this too little? And we did that for a number of different scenes. The translunar injection maneuver, a fancy way of saying they just light the candle to go to the moon. So the rocket, launches. They do a couple of orbits around the Earth, and then they do this burn. It's a very important burn. It's called the J2 engine. It lights and ignites. And, it's always depicted in Hollywood as kind of a standard thing. It's not. It's a very big thing. You're leaving low Earth orbit. You're leaving everything you've ever known. And it's all in your rearview mirror. But what's extraordinary about it, most of the Apollo missions, they did it on the dark side of the Earth, and they all talk about it, and you hear it on the onboard audio. In fact, Armstrong himself goes, we're passing right over the terminator, meaning the dark part of the Earth into the light part of Earth, where the sunrise is happening. Gene Cernan on 17 described it as TL line right into sunrise. I'd never seen it depicted before, and I damn well wanted to see it depicted in my film. So luckily we found they didn't shoot it on Apollo 11. I asked Mike Collins and Buzz Aldrin about it to describe it. We showed them some examples, and sure enough, there was another Apollo mission where they actually shot it, and that's what's depicted in the film. And then add that in with the exact telemetry on how fast in miles per hour it's going with the countdown of the engine, going. And it was just, again, we had Buzz here actually in New York shortly before we debuted at Sundance to screen the entire thing, just not pieces. And it was just like the joy of my life to talk to him about that. What did we get right? What did we get wrong? Because I was in revision mode at that point. And lucky to say, he loved it, and it was so gratifying. And it was great to work with those guys. And Neil's sons, Rick and Mark, the first people I showed any footage to when we first had it. Get on a plane with a laptop, go show Neil's sons, and and of course they've just been so gracious with their time since, and it's been the absolute pleasure to work with those guys.
Well, it's been an absolute pleasure to hang out and talk to you, man. I want to thank you, one, not just for being here, but two, for making this movie. It's not just a beautiful movie. You've done a great thing for us as a society to have this. It was just sitting in a pile before you guys put in the blood, sweat, and tears to turn it into this, and now we get to experience it and relive it and see it through fresh eyes, man. Something that's just so amazing and so beautiful. Congratulations on this film. It is wide release this week. It's coming out. The soundtrack's coming out. If you can find the biggest screen you can find, people, and go watch this film. And it is a beautiful thing. I'm getting the signal. I'm going to wrap it up. I don't know if that was clear, but Todd, thank you so much, man. Everybody make a ridiculous amount of noise. Apollo 11, Todd Douglas Miller. Go see it right now. Go.